Hey, how's it going, everybody? Today, I wanted to make a quick, fun discussion topic that I had been thinking about for a minute now, and that is 5 things that I look for when buying books. Now, I would consider myself typically a little on the pickier side when it comes to buying books. There are things when I'm looking at the bookstore that will just immediately turn me off from a book, but there are also things that I specifically look for that in my mind help me sum up or summarize what I think a good book could be. And these 5 things are really more of a superstitious, not doesn't really necessarily have an impact on how good of a story a book can be. It's just kind of like surface level things that I look for that will get my foot in the door when attempting to purchase a new book. So the first one is the cover. I love amazing artwork. If if a book has incredible artwork that draws my eye to it, I'm immediately obviously going to want to look for it. Give me a cover that's really interesting compared to one that's boring. Who would want to look at the boring one, really? So I don't really necessarily, when they say don't judge a book by its cover, I don't really think they mean it literally like that. You could take that as a metaphor for and apply that to other things in your life. But I really, really love when a book has interesting artwork that draws your eye in. And I kind of have an example here. I haven't read this book yet, but I can never say this word. The Peculiarities by David Liss. If you look closely, it's this rabbit type of thing with a bunch of geometric shapes, and there's a city. I think it takes place in London or somewhere in England, but something like this really draws my eye in. And it's had great artwork has had such an impact on books, like drawing me to a book, that it's almost made me want to buy a book, even though it's typically not like the type of story that I would typically go after. So for me, artwork can have a huge impact on what I'm looking for. Number 2, I typically go for similar genres: sci-fi, fantasy, but I also like when a world is based in reality, not necessarily modern day, but just a regular, society, but there's a hint of something supernatural about the world that doesn't seem quite right. For example, I might be picking this one up a lot, which is why I, bought it in the past, but this one has something to do with living in London, and then magic, weird things start to happen in the world around them. Like this main character, I think he starts turning into a tree. Like, what does that even mean? Like, I've got to read this book because that just sounds so unusual, so strange. But things like that really draw me in, where especially I prefer more low fantasy or low magic fantasy instead of like high magic fantasy. For example, where like low magic would be, think of maybe Lord of the Rings or something, I think would be a good example. Or let's say like Lord of the Rings versus Harry Potter, right? Those are both fantasy. Lord of the Rings is more about, there's magic in the world, but there's not always an instance where magic is dominating like the battlefield, or it's dominating everything about the story. Whereas Harry Potter, they literally have wands that they walk around with, and shooting magic spells, and it's so intertwined into the fabric of what that story is. I love Harry Potter. I love Lord of the Rings. Typically nowadays, as I grow older, I like to look for something that is more set in reality, uh, and then with a hint of like supernatural. Like my favorite book, I have a book review. You guys can find it on this channel. House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, where the house that they live in, it's an everyday house, but one day when they get back from vacation, a doorway appears in their living room. It opens up into a labyrinth that seemingly goes into a different dimension. And then they go inside that and start exploring it. So it's based in reality, but then something strange happens just overnight, and that defies your concept of what should exist and what shouldn't exist. So I like things like that, where they really kind of make you think and leaves you with that book hangover, where you're stuck and you finish a book and you have to take a couple minutes to snap back to reality. Number 3 would be the size of the text. Now that might seem like a silly thing, but hear me out. In my mind, typically text that is smaller and more compact leads me to believe that the writing is more mature and that the book is going to contain a higher level of detail when world building, when describing characters. Oh, I'm going to add one more thing here so I don't forget. Hold on 1 second. Sorry. Okay. And I'll give you an example. Typically, I shy away from young adult series. I used to read that back in the day. Occasionally, I will pick up a young adult book, young adult series if it's popular enough. But I have a perfect example, so I'm gonna pick up. No, let's not pick up this one. Let's pick up. I've done a review of this one on my channel, so you can check this one out too. The Grand Dark by Richard Kadrey. This is dystopian, and if you look on the inside, and maybe I'll pick up the peculiarities again, but I like to pick text that is more compact, right? The more text that you can fit on the page just seems more attractive to me. So there's the Grand Dark, and then same thing with peculiarities. And plus this one has like some artwork in it, little symbols and stuff on the page. But typically something like this is what I look for, compared to something that I'm reading now. I have a lot of Natasha Preston books reviews on my page because they're really popular, and generally they're easy to get through. But maybe if I didn't have this channel, I probably would not be reading so much of this. But I know that there's a lot of people that watch my book reviews of this, and I generally enjoy the things that I read of hers. But something like this, where I don't know if you can tell the difference really, but the more spaced out the words are, makes me think that there wasn't much of a story really, and you're kind of just using bigger text to like fill in the space of a book or something. And like I said earlier, this is really all just surface level, superficial things that really won't have an impact on necessarily the story. But in my mind, that's kind of what I look for first. So I tend to look for smaller text because it's just intertwined with me for having more detail, I guess. So number 4, and there's 6 here. Did I say 5 earlier? I don't know. Maybe I'll make it 6 in the title. Book size. I don't really like reading books that are like, you can't even hold open. For me, a perfect size, I did this recently, Red Rising, check out this review. Kind of like the young adult book size, right? I really like this thinner, not too thin, but kind of like a medium size thing. And because I don't know, it feels good when you hold it. And if something's too short, maybe they don't have enough storytelling, or if it's too long, you're like, oh my God, this book needs to end. And I guess the book size could also go along with this one, Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. This was a new print of this has been around for such a long time. I've never read them, but I do plan on reading this, and it's a series on Amazon Prime now. But this one, compared to like the young adult, Natasha Preston, I guess you might have to just kind of size that up for yourself. But I really kind of like these bigger medium books, right? Not something that's so big, but these ones that you can't hold open, with one hand maybe. And that one also has text that I really like. So so number 5, that was number 4. Number 5, I wrote down the something Chronicles, right? I typically like one-shot books, single books that aren't part of a trilogy, because my first thought is that if it's a trilogy or has 6 or 7 books in the series, other than, the Wheel of Time is like an epic fantasy, so there's like 14, probably more common back in the day. But nowadays, when I see books with trilogies or 4 or 5 books in the series, it's like, I get that feeling that they didn't know where to stop, and they wanted to choose quantity over quality, or as soon as an author or publisher or someone, I don't know, whoever makes the decision, has a idea for a book or a story in mind, let's make it a trilogy. Just seems to be jumping on a trend. And in my mind, I like to have a single book that can introduce characters, make me fall in love with them, finish the story, wrap it up nicely, so that there's, not that I don't like cliffhangers, but I think for me, the quality of a book in one book beats the quantity of having a trilogy or a duology or 4 or 5, that type of thing. There are exceptions. Like I've started reading, well, not started, but I'm in the process of reading the Kingkiller Chronicles. And I use that name because any other, I think, young adult series tend to go after that type of title often. The whatever Chronicles, the Royal Court Chronicles, right? And I kind of chuckle to myself every time I see that at the bookstore, because if you go into the young adult section, it just all looks the same, right? If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. But luckily with Patrick Rothfuss, his Kingkiller Chronicles, everybody was raving about The Name of the Wind, and I read it. I gave it a 5 out of 5. I'm about 300 pages into The Wise Man's Fear, but if I hadn't seen so many positive reviews about it, I probably would have skipped over it on the bookshelf, if I'm being honest, because it kind of goes against some of the things that I've listed here already. But, again, just surface level stuff. And then the one I just added during this video, I knew I was forgetting something, is I tend to like to read books that are in third person, because when I'm reading something in first person, it seems like there's a lot of, I saw this and that, and I did this, and I said this. For third person characters, you can get a lot more perspective, right? If you're in first person, the story is only being told really through their eyes, unless it changes character's perspective. But I don't know if I've ever read a book that is first person that changes character perspective. I like reading third person because it tends to have more detail in my mind. You're not constrained to just one character's viewpoint. You can have your characters, let's say you have 3 main characters, you can have them branch off, and he's going here, she's going there, and tell their own individual stories. Whereas if you're reading a book that's in first person, it's really only restricted to that one, to that one narrative. So obviously I've read things that completely break all these rules. I've read things that follow these rules to, right down to the letter. But I'm curious. I wanted to make this video because I'm curious what other people look for too. Do you go for popular books? Do you like to read books that are very underground, not well known, that you might have to buy, at a used bookstore that's not on a Barnes and Noble bookshelf? Because right now I've read a lot of books in the past, however many months, that really caught my interest, and maybe are not the most popular with everybody, but I'm in a mood right now where I'm kind of checking out more of the New York Times bestseller and books that are being made into movies and things that are trending. So I'm kind of in a different mood at the moment. And I have moods where I change from, I want to read a bunch of fantasy in a row, or I want to read a bunch of sci-fi in a row. And then I have those moments where we're in, everybody's had a book slump where you can only read 10 pages and nothing is interesting you. So I'm just wanted to share that with everybody. And I'm just curious as to what it is maybe that you look for when buying books. Do you agree with me or do you disagree with me? Let me know if any of our list of things matches up. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next book review video. See you later.